This is the Observations Podcast for Friday, the 24th of February, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
And it looks like we've actually started and we really are live. Great. Some administrivia that we have to get out of the way. And I just started to talk about this with Michael, and then we ran out of time and we just had to start the podcast. So we started the podcast. Most of you are aware, and you have made me aware repeatedly, both here and on Twitter, that there is something going on with the past episodes of the podcast. That for some reason, the podcasts aren't being recorded by Mixlr. Sure, they're going out live, and you can hear us live, but you can't hear us recorded, which means you have no access to past podcasts. So, Michael and I have been talking about a couple of things. In the interim, I think, until the thing we're about to talk about comes to fruition, in the interim, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to restart doing an RSS feed, uploading it up to AWS, recording the podcast episodes locally, and doing the stuff locally that I have to do, uploading the podcast and an RSS feed. That should revitalize the Observations Podcast on Google Play and on the iTunes store. So you should be able to hear the podcast then, and you'll be able to hear past episodes, not all of them. In fact, practically none of them. We'll start this week, and then we'll see how that goes. So in the interim, we're going to be back on doing podcasting old school, the way we used to do it. Mixlr will only be the live portion, and the portion for pre-recorded stuff you're going to have to get through your favorite podcast app. Now, Michael and I have been talking about taking this from a solely audio format. And so one of the reasons why I said that this recording and going back to Apple Podcasts is just for the audio part. We are working on going full audio. Now, for those of you who don't know, I do have a full television studio here in my office, so I can go, full video all the time. However, I'm a weirdo who has a television studio in his office. Most people don't have that. So, Michael is working on getting set up for video on his end, and also getting set up for a little more professional sound than just, talking on his iPhone. Via Zoom, which, by the way, as far as audio is concerned, Michael, doesn't sound bad at all.
No, it doesn't.
But, to do the video, it'd be nice if we both had good microphones and we could both be on video. So, our future plan, and I have no idea when this might come to fruition. It might be, weeks, it might be a couple of months, but I think ultimately our plan is to move this over into a video podcast and probably put it on, well, let's see, where will we not get canceled? Probably Rumble.
Rumble, I was going to say.
Yeah, I think Rumble is our only choice here because obviously sometimes we're a little heterodox in our thinking, and YouTube would ultimately destroy us, and I really don't want to be dependent on Google. Don't want to really be dependent on Rumble either, but they seem to be more trustworthy at this point than Google is. So... And we might try with both and just see how it works. I mean, I can
might as well go with YouTube until they kick us off, right?
Or we can go to YouTube until they kick us off, and then we can switch to Rumble. I guess that's always possible. Plus, we can always use YouTube for, I guess, shorts anyway, or clips. Assuming that I ever had the inclination to sit down and do video editing to pull a clip out of a hour and a half or 2 hour podcast. I guess we'll see how dedicated I am about that, but I think that the initial suspicion should be not very. So that's sort of the direction that we're heading. So you kind of caught me in a transitional period right now, to quote Pulp Fiction. So we're going to see where that goes. But for now, I'm trying to record locally, which is why we, for those of you who are listening live, why we had to restart the podcast 3 times so that I could actually get Audition running, so that I could get something recorded, or get the recording started. And then I'll just upload those to AWS along with an updated RSS feed, you'll be able to pull our past podcasts, at least for the time being, down from there. And who knows? I'm not sure how Google works with RSS. I may have to do some investigation on that for both Google or perhaps Rumble, wherever we ultimately decide to run this thing to. And I think at that point, I might be able to take those videos and add them into an RSS feed that shows up on both iTunes and on Google Play. So we'll see how that works out. But anyway, those are the plans. We've been doing this on Mixlr Live, and it's been so easy to do. But Mixlr updated, quote unquote, their software, and nothing works. And all of my local recordings that have been coming off of Mixlr for the last couple of weeks are, for whatever reason, just completely trashed. And so they can't be, I can't replay them locally. And of course, they don't upload to Mixlr either. So the live version is all that we got. Oh, and by the way, Michael, listener, says, yes, Michael usually sounds okay on his iPhone. So there we go. Yeah, I think the iPhone sound is good as well. So our plans are to make some transitional moves here and then see if we can end up with more of a video podcast, because, video, that's what all the kids are doing these days. And yeah, you laughed, Michael. And I did say it as kind of a joke, but really, when you look at where podcasting is going, it's basically all video now. I mean, who cares about it?
Really is.
Yeah, who cares about an audio podcast?
The big ones went that way a long time ago, and now, hell, even the upstarts. I mean, they just start off with video.
Yeah, what am I going to do? Listen to an audio podcast like some kind of animal?
Right.
So I think video is ultimately the way to go. We could do the video thing now, by the way, at least on my end. And then you could sit and stare at me talking to, a picture of Michael.
You have a cool background.
I have a whole bunch of cool backgrounds, my friend.
That's what I mean. You can change them.
Oh, yeah. I've got the full green screen thing happening here, not the cheap, crappy one that Zoom provides. I have OBS. I have real chroma key capability. On a television studio that I built literally for under $200.
That's pretty damn good. I mean, it cost me $600 to get as far as I've gotten. And still,
back when I was in high school, I was working, part-time for in Albuquerque, New Mexico for cable channel 45, and I worked at nights doing sort of technical stuff in the studio, playing shows, because you have to start the 3/4-inch VHS 7 seconds prior to the actual airtime to give it the 7 seconds to spool up. And I also worked as a cameraman part-time as well for local shows in the studio. And, these Sony cameras cost at the time, $25,000, $30,000 to broadcast in, 480 SD at the time. And, now I've got basically a 4K camera that I bought for $120. And I've got some daylight LED lights on some stands that, again, with the lights and the light stands, cost me another $100. So basically for $220, I have a television studio that I literally would have, I would have had to murder someone for money to be able to afford the setup that I have now, back in the 1980s.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, think about it. Just on your phone alone, the Apple iPhone, I guess 11 and on. I mean, you could easily record a podcast in quite beautiful video without any problem at all.
Yeah, and by the way, people do.
Yeah,
people do use their iPhone to shoot this stuff,
and it looks good. I mean, that's how far advanced we've really come with all this technology. Well, actually, that's not even the half of it. If you think about all the crap that AI is doing now.
Well, I just, sitting here as I am right now, looking at my computer, I have a live radio broadcasting piece of software that is running. I have a video conferencing piece of software through which you and I are conversing. that is actually doing live video and audio between the two of us 4 time zones away from each other. I have a digital audio recorder running in the background, and I could, if I really wanted to pop up the video, run Open Broadcasting Studio on my computer at the same time, so that we could have, professional high def audio back and forth. And by the way, Zoom costs me $49 a year. So does Mixler. So that's $100 a year. OBS is free, and I got $220 worth of camera and lights. And I have a television studio that you probably could not have built in 1985 for less than $250,000.
And think about it, back then, that was when cable access was all the rage.
Oh yeah, tell me about it, because that was a lot of the stuff that I was filming, cable access stuff with a $30,000 Sony camera.
Yeah,
with that had a black and white monitor on the back of it, by the way.
Of course it did.
Because why would you ever need to see anything in color ever when you're the cameraman? All you have to worry about is not cutting off the top of somebody's head.
Yeah, exactly. Just keep it in frame.
Oh, and by the way, again from chat, talking about how I have all of this stuff that costs next to nothing. Yeah, many people do. Cam girls do it all the time.
That's true.
Yeah.
OnlyFans wouldn't exist without this sort of technology.
Yeah, that is true. And by the way, like every other technology that has ever been created, all of this technology services the pornography industry before it services all the rest of us.
I mean, it's really where it, pardon the pun, but, works out the kinks.
Yeah, exactly. In many different ways. All right, so with all of that over and out of the way, I guess we should go ahead and talk about what's going on and where. Honestly, I'm not sure where to start, simply because of and it's nothing new. It's this continuing wave of incompetence coming off of the Biden administration that just never ceases to astound me. So 2 things. Pete Buttigieg finally decided to show up in Ohio, wearing his little hard hat and his reflective vest. He looked adorable.
He was a little Bob the Builder.
Yeah, cosplaying a construction worker. And then you had Joe Biden, flying over to Ukraine to hobnob with Vladimir Zelensky.
Well, it's a really interesting juxtaposition, because here you have, literally working class. I mean, we're talking Ohio, Pennsylvania border, West Virginia, Kentucky. I mean, coal mining, industry. I mean, this is like the heart of the working class. And, the Biden administration couldn't be more, dismissive of what's going on there, or the media for that matter. Yet,
and these are supposed to be Joe's people, by the way.
Yeah. And, we've got a border that is completely overrun. Actually, we've got 2 borders that are completely overrun. And they don't want to do anything about that, but we'll be damned if we're not going to spend billions, if not trillions of dollars in Ukraine to protect their border. And this is where it gets difficult, because of course Ukraine shouldn't be invaded by Russia. And of course we need to push back against Russia. But in the end, what is our real interest there? And, what are the limits on this? I mean, it's become a politicized thing. And it's now, like I said, it's a huge juxtaposition with how we're treating our own people.
Well, I got bad news for you. If we couldn't figure out what our purpose and ultimate goal was in Afghanistan after 20 years, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to figure it out in Ukraine.
Well, unfortunately, I think we have some vested interests on the parts of the political class. Um, and now some of this is fact, and a lot of it is conjecture. The fact is that we do have um, medical testing sites there, much like we had in Wuhan. Right? Well, still have in Wuhan. That we have done pretty much the same things there that we've done, and apparently are still doing in Wuhan. So there's speculation, and it makes sense. I mean, if you want to, draw it out, but I've not seen that there's any proof of this whatsoever. But it does make sense that if this was an order of law, an episode of Law and Order, this would be the motive that would get you going. That these vested interests, the money class, the donor class, don't want to be found out about what they've been doing in the Ukraine. Now, the Ukraine is also famously pretty corrupt. I mean, they've jailed their former presidents before. They've, tossed out prosecutors because they got too close to the donor interests. I mean, they are sort of Russia light when it comes to, how their political world works.
Yeah, because in Russia, if you get too close to corruption, Putin just has you bumped off.
Right. Unless you're, bought into it. But if you turn away, well, yeah. I'd stay away from Windows. If I were you.
The Russian general who heads their military procurement system has an $8 million dacha outside of Moscow.
Yeah, of course. But so anyway, the point is that the only reason this seems to be such a big deal is, well, the stated reason is that, well, we're defending democracy around the world. Oh, really?
Yeah, I got a better reason than that. But go on.
Yeah. That there seems to be, well, and of course, pushing back on Russian aggression. That's definitely a good reason. But there is some speculation, and again, it's just speculation, basically rumors, that there are moneyed interests that don't want anyone to find out what they were doing there. And that's why they get all heebie-jeebied about, when they get close to where some of these laboratories and test sites are.
Right. Well, let's rewind that a little bit. After the Soviet Union broke up, the Soviets had biological warfare research centers frickin' everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we did as part of the Department of Defense is we went in and helped demilitarize these facilities and kind of turn them over to civilian medical research, and kind of like the sort of like a biological warfare version of the Atoms for Peace program. And so the speculation is that what we actually did is just decided to do our own research there on chemical or biological weapons, which I think is would be an extraordinarily dumb thing for us to do research in a country like Ukraine, which is so close to Russia. There's lots of places we could do that research here, like out in the middle of Nevada, where nobody'd ever know about it.
Right.
But who knows, what's going on there. I don't give a lot of credence to that whole there's biolabs. Well, kind of. They're medical research labs now, and we have funded them. What are they doing? I don't know. I'm not sure anybody does. And in a country as corrupt as Ukraine, I'm not sure that anybody could ever really say, except for somebody who was actually there doing it. But it's a lot more complicated than that. All this rah talk about how we have to, defend Ukraine from aggression, and there's this principle that we learned in the 1930s of non-appeasement and standing up to the dictators. All that stuff sounds good for the rubes and hayseeds, but in actuality, it is an interesting method to test our ability to move large amounts of military material fairly quickly to see how close we can get it to the front lines during an actual conflict. It does give us the ability to test a lot of weapon systems that we've never been able to go, mano a mano with the Russians, and to see how these weapon systems work against Russian equipment, doctrine, and training. It's an interesting laboratory for us to test a lot of our equipment and a lot of our logistics on the Russians. And that certainly sounds less altruistic than, defending a peaceful people from aggression. But, I wouldn't count that out.
Yeah. Well, and after Wuhan and many of the other things that have come to the foreground in the past, 7 years, there's not a lot I wouldn't put past the federal government anymore. I don't necessarily buy that that's the big interest. What you're saying actually makes at least some. It makes a lot of sense as to wanting to test capabilities and have real war conditions to figure out how our systems work and if our strategies are correct and all that sort of stuff.
And the only people who have to die are Ukrainians.
Exactly, which is very jaded. But it's not like we haven't done that before. So,
well, there is also a secondary issue that I didn't mention, which is, if you believe the sort of the Peter Zion style of analysis, is that the Russians don't want Ukraine. What the Russians want, at least in the West, is Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia and Estonia, because they have to have those areas to cut off an invasion route into the Soviet Union or into Russia. And so, their historical imperative has been to find these geographical areas where they can block an invasion. And with their current borders, they simply can't do that. From the border of Ukraine to Moscow, it's just this nice flat plain that anybody can drive across. So, there is also the fear that if they get Ukraine, that's not the end of it, because now they've got, Moldova that is still sort of sticking out there all by itself. And, the only way to bring that in is to go after Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So they'd have to be brought back in. And if the Russians get away with it in Ukraine, they begin looking towards Poland and the Baltics. So,
I don't think there's a question about that. I think that's always been at the back of Putin's mind and whoever he trusts to actually advise him. That's the ultimate goal, is to reconstitute the old Soviet Union borders.
And then you have to start looking south to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan and Georgia. So, there's a lot of things other than just this principled stand against aggression, which, by the way, is a perfectly fine and perfectly principled stand. I don't have any argument with it at all. In fact, it's quite a moral stand. I'm just not sure it is the entire story here when faced with what Putin is doing. Now, whether Putin has the ability to reconstitute the borders of the Soviet Union is an open question, especially after not being able to take Ukraine. But I don't know, it's a very, very complex situation. But there are a lot of people, certainly on the right, and this is where you hear it most on the right, that Joe Biden cares more for Ukrainians than he does about Americans, which, may actually be true. But
yeah, I mean, that's a pretty reasonable conclusion to reach based on the limited information that we have.
But, there are other things going on with Ukraine other than this. There are reasons why the U.S. is supporting it that are basically not just purely moral and unself-interested reasons.
Well, and then here's the biggest problem with that. Yeah, we're supporting it. We're supporting it like 99%. The European countries are all about supporting it, but where's the actual support? They do almost nothing.
Okay, you lost me. Who is they? Who is doing the almost nothing?
Europe.
Oh, the
Anybody.
Europeans. Well, the Germans finally decided to send some leopards.
It sent some tanks. Yeah,
And by the way, the Germans have been sending artillery.
that's true.
But Germany's problem, like most other European countries, with the exception of to a certain extent, France and Great Britain, but for all of the other European countries, this is undoubtedly true. Their militaries suck, and they don't have a lot of equipment anyway. And what equipment they have is half of it's probably deadlined.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, even Germany, what was it about like 5 or 6 years ago? They tried to do a baseline test and see where they were, and they couldn't even get a single platoon operational. I mean, they don't have. They've been all butter, no guns. We're the
Yeah,
guns.
the Bundeswehr is a disaster and has been a disaster for 20 years, and everybody knows it. In fact, I on a fairly regular basis watch Deutsche Welle, their English language service, which is actually fairly good, by the way. But I watched Deutsche Welle, and they did a 1 hour special that might as well have been titled "Why the Bundeswehr Sucks."
Right. I mean, at least the Germans have an excuse in that they were, basically forbidden from having any sort of military for several decades.
They had a pretty good military in the 1980s, my friend. And after the unification, much of Germany's interest turned inward. It turned to rebuilding the eastern half of the country, to fully implementing unification. Of course, the SPD took over for a large portion of that time as well, and still, by the way, took over. And they're largely a pacifist socialist movement. And
Right.
so they have just underfunded the Bundeswehr for years. And why wouldn't they? Because they've been living under the American security umbrella since the end of 1945. And
Exactly.
reality has now begun catching up with them. And I don't think that Schultz is, despite what he says, I don't think he really has the pull in the Bundestag to massively rearm Germany and rebuild the Bundeswehr.
Yeah, he does not. Although he is at least trying to turn away from the Merkel stagnation. You're right, he does not. And I don't think he has an inclination to really go that far anyway. But my point was that Germany at least has an excuse for being anemic. Great Britain and France, which are actually, France in particular has some really fantastic special forces, as does Great Britain.
France has good conventional forces as well. I mean, you're talking about
only to the extent. Go ahead.
You are talking about a country whose police force has Leclerc main battle tanks.
Yeah.
The gendarmerie has an armored company.
They haven't been overseas to deploy any of these since what, Algeria?
No, it's the Foreign Legion that generally gets deployed first.
Yeah,
but their parachute regiment has also been deployed, certainly throughout northern and central Africa.
I mean, these should be two powerhouses, and they aren't. I mean, they're not even close. And especially after World War II, you would have thought they would try to protect themselves more. After World War I, they did. But no, instead we created the United Nations, and now everything's just going to be hunky-dory. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to actually spend any money on any of our military capability or needs. We'll just, depend on these intergovernmental bodies to protect us.
Well, there was a point, certainly in the very first part of the 1980s, that the Germans held the U.S. armed forces in contempt. They referred to us as the Italians of the 80s.
Did they really?
Oh, yeah. But of course, that was, prior to the Reagan buildup. And the literally trillions of dollars that we funneled into training and upgrades to our capability throughout the 1980s. But certainly at the end of the 70s and the early 1980s, the U.S. forces were generally held in contempt by the Germans, of all people.
Well, I mean, the Vietnam experiment did not pan out well
No, it
for
didn't.
troop morale and regimented troops and whatever.
No, the army we had in 1969 was a vastly different army than the one we had in 65.
Yes.
And it took, 15 years to recover from that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure we have that sort of luxury now.
Well, what I find interesting about this whole Ukraine thing is how utterly shrill, and they're libertarians, so, take it with a grain of salt, but how utterly shrill the official Libertarian Party organs are about getting out of Ukraine entirely. And even on the right, how, and I take some caution in saying this because I don't want to just be repeating, proggy cant here, but there are commentators on the right who certainly appear to be more pro-Putin than they are pro-peace.
Well, I don't know about who's pro-Putin. I mean, I don't think anybody's pro-Putin. Even the left is against Putin. I mean, I think that's the one thing everybody can agree on.
Yeah, it's not the problem that the left is against Putin. The problem is that many on the right seem not to be.
Really?
Look, I see it on now. Granted, Twitter is not real life, but I see people on the right on Twitter that, they're always popping off with things like, well, Vladimir Putin doesn't believe in this gender stuff. And Vladimir Putin wants to make the church, primary in Russian life. There's plenty of people who, I noticed this when the Ukraine war started, from a lot of people, like who was that Marine, Scott, what's his name, who was an arms inspector for the UN.
I remember who you're talking about.
Yeah, and I remember at the beginning of the Ukraine war, he was going on all these, mill blogger podcasts and was talking about how great the Russians are and how they're going to roll over the Ukrainians.
He was, because he was the one that was like saying that U.S. was like war criminals for going into Iraq.
Yeah, well, now he was saying that the Russians really need to do this, and look, there are Nazis in the Ukraine. Let's not gloss over it. And he's saying Putin needs to do this because he's got these Nazis in the Ukraine. He can't have Nazis on his border. They've already been down that road once. Although how Ukraine is any threat to Russia is beyond me. It's a nation of like 3 million people, for goodness sakes. Nevertheless, there are a lot of people who talk as if they were in Putin's pocket, even if they're not. And there are a lot of people on the right who think that Putin is some sort of, sure, he's an authoritarian and we don't like that. And of course, authoritarians are bad, but he does seem like a good Christian man who wants to, who wants to, keep Russia a traditionally moral country, as if Russia was ever a moral country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not since Catherine the Great, anyway. Yeah, no, that's weird. I've never encountered any of that. That's completely misguided and completely.
That's the whole thing about Tucker Carlson, right? This week, that McCarthy turned over a bunch of J6 video camera footage to Tucker Carlson, and that was the first thing that came across Twitter. Now, obviously, it came from the Keith Olbermans of the world saying, well, you might as well have just sent the entire plans of the Capitol to Vladimir Putin.
And it's come just from Keith Olbermans, came from the Chuck Schumers and Jeremy Raskins.
Yeah, giving this stuff to Tucker Carlson is just like giving it to Putin. Tucker's going to turn all that over to Vladimir Putin, like Tucker Carlson has just got, Vladimir Putin's email account.
It's like they've never actually even seen him or something. I don't know. That's just weird. Well, it's not weird. It's typical. It has to be politicized, and you got to poison the well before anything comes out. But the fact that there are people out there, rooting on Putin, like he has to do this, that's a little scary, and it just kind of makes me think that things have become so politicized that well, if my enemy wants it, then I must be against it, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
It's like it's become tribal.
and the thing is that it's put us in the position of making the Ukrainians these brave freedom fighters, who are, well, I guess to an extent they are fighting for a freedom, which is a freedom from Russian control. I'm not sure that they want what we would consider, actual freedom, considering that, they did, after all, bring the Azov Brigade into their army, and they are all Nazis. I mean, they were a Nazi paramilitary. Now they're officially sanctioned part of the army. And so part of what has happened with this politicization is that we've now had to sort of spend a lot of time writing hagiography about the Ukrainians, and how wonderful they are and how brave Zelensky is, blah, 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 and how bad Vladimir Putin is. And look, the Ukrainians have plenty of problems on their side that it doesn't do us.
It is not a perfect nation. It has never really completely separated itself politically from Russia. I mean, it's tried several times politically through the polls to do so. And yet Russian influence has been in Ukrainian politics since it became its own free nation.
Yeah. And of course, there's the Nazi problem. We can't elide past that. There is a serious Nazi problem in the country. They have a lot of neo-Nazis, and pretending that this is an unalloyed struggle between good and evil. It's actually a struggle between evil and really aggressive evil. And
yeah, well, I would say like a super great like global shifting evil versus an evil that is, not going to affect anybody else.
Versus a relatively impotent evil.
Right.
It's an evil with intercontinental ballistic missiles against a 3
really
million
big hand grenade.
A 3 million person area of rather banal and commonplace evil.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that every Ukrainian is bad or every Ukrainian is a Nazi. Obviously, that's not true. But Ukraine is a weird country. But we don't acknowledge that. And we don't, I would have, and I guess there are diplomatic reasons why you can't do this, but I would have a lot more respect for a presidency that said, yeah, look, we are going to support Ukraine. We're going to support Ukraine for a couple of reasons. One of them, obviously, you can't just go invading neighboring countries. We can't just allow that to happen. That's a bad precedent to set, because if they'll do it there, then that just lets them know that they can do it somewhere else. So you got to stop that. The Ukrainians, yeah, they're not great people. They're certainly not.
At least their government isn't.
Yeah, at least their government's not. I mean, the Ukrainian people, many of them may be fine, but their government is super shady. Not quite as shady as Russia's government, which is just a full-on kleptocracy under Vladimir Putin, but still, shady. So we could just do nothing and let the Russians just do what they're going to do and run the risk of this blowing into some widespread war. If the Russians do win and they start feeling stroppy and they go up against NATO, we're going to inflict 1,000 to 1 casualties on them in the first week. And they're going to start punching nuclear buttons because it'll be the only choice they have really fucking quick. Because if the Russians go up against us, we will slaughter them by the thousands. Now, true, every war Russia has ever fought has included them being slaughtered by the thousands. But I mean, this would be quick. We don't.
Yeah, this isn't ground war. We'll wait you out in Stalingrad.
Yeah, no. People have no idea how. If we were to do a force-on-force conflict, people have no idea how amazingly lethal the American armed forces are. I mean, we may not be very good at guerrilla warfare and haven't been. We're Vietnam,
never been
Afghanistan,
since the Revolutionary War.
But you run up in our face on a force-on-force, and we will kick your ass.
Yeah, that's not even an issue.
And by the way, you better hope we kick your ass quick, because if we decide that we're going to gear up for a real war, you are fucked. So there is fear, I think, at the Pentagon that if we let the Russians go, and they decide that, they feel stroppy and they feel they could take us on and that we wouldn't do anything, and they force us into a position like invading a NATO country like Poland, where we would have to do something, we would very quickly make it so obvious to the Russians that that was a horrific mistake, they would start launching nukes.
But would we? See, that's the thing. I just, and I can appreciate the nuance that you're putting into play there. I think that it's already well calculated out by Russia that we're not, neither us nor Europe is going to do anything. And I think China is in on this game as well. They put out that thing, was it today, yesterday, their peace plan, which was a bunch of nonsense. And it looked to me, at least, like it was calculated to just get a complete rejection from the West so that China can now say, well, if you're not going to do that, then we're just going to give the Russians weapons.
Yeah, well, that's coming right out of the old commie playbook. Let's just make some demands that are supposedly for peace, but that we know are absolutely unacceptable. And then we can always just say, hey, we tried.
Yeah, well, we're just completely stupid. But, get rid of the Cold War mindset. What the hell does that even mean?
Yeah, that's one of those demands that, like, can you explain that in a little more detail?
Get a 5-paragraph essay on that, please. Yeah, so I mean, it's well, not to get into the whole China-Russia nexus, but Russian aggression is absolutely a problem. Supporting Ukraine is absolutely in our long-term interests when it comes to the disruption that Russia will cause. Because if they do take Ukraine, they're absolutely going after Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They're absolutely going to start pressuring Poland. They're going to pull Belarus into that.
Belarus is a puppet state already. I mean, they've effectively
that's right.
There.
Yeah. So I mean, it does create a lot of pressure, and what I don't know that Russia is so much concerned about the territorial gains as it is extracting concessions from the threat of those territorial gains. But of course, as we all know, once you start exacting those concessions, well, you can keep making the threat and keep getting, I mean, this is Dingeld all over again. And if they're backed by the Chinese, well, now you've got, assuming that they be unified, you've got now the most powerful military force on the planet. And that's fucking scary.
Well,
so yes, I do think that I understand what you're about to say, that about the most powerful. Now going into the Ukraine, it is an important objective to retard that. But what we have not heard, and never has anything been explained, other than Russia cannot win. Okay, but what does that mean? What does that mean us in terms of blood and treasure? So far, we're only spending treasure. And on one hand, that's fine. On the other hand, it's like, well, we're spending a lot of treasure. We've spent now, I think, almost as much treasure as on the Ukraine wars we did in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that is a problem.
And so it's like, and how accountable is that treasure? We're giving it to a corrupt country. It's not like we're giving them specific things. I mean, we have given them specific things, but we're also just giving them a lot of blank checks. And that's problematic.
And if we go back to 1914, one of the things that all of the belligerents learned pretty quickly was that the millions of rounds of artillery ammo that they had stockpiled over the previous 20 years were good for about 6 weeks. And then they'd be out. And we're finding the same thing. Now, one of the things that always has stuck in my mind for 40 years has been Canadian Professor Gwyn Dyer and his series and book War, where he was talking about, in this particular example, it was the F-15. And he was saying, the United States, during World War II, the United States, Germany was building 4,000 fighter aircraft a month. And that was in 1945. They were still building 4,000 fighter aircraft a month. The United States now builds, I believe at the time, 15 F-15s a year. They build 1.3 a month. And so the next war will be a come-as-you-are war. And I think the Ukraine has demonstrated that perfectly. We have not only seen the Russians, apparently, because we have very little direct information about the Russians, but we have apparently seen them strip their stockpiles of artillery ammunition, their stockpiles of armored personnel carriers, tanks. And if we look at what at least the Department of Defense is telling us, we are rapidly depleting our stockpiles of 105, 155 millimeter field artillery, all sorts of other military equipment, missiles like HIMARS. We don't produce enough of that to replace what we have spent over the past year. It'll take a decade to replace all of that. And of course, some of the stuff, like the Stingers that we gave them, those will never be replaced. They're never coming back. We don't make the Stinger anymore, which I guess giving it to the Ukrainians is better than just demilling it and throwing it away. But that's never going to be replaced. We're not going to build a Block 5 of Stingers. Right. So all of this equipment has just been sucked up by the Ukraine war. And by the way, this is a small war. This is a very small, very localized war. I'm sure it doesn't seem small if you're in Ukraine, and it probably doesn't seem small if you're a soldier on the front lines, because, if you're on the front lines, every war is, major for you.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you died in Verdun in 1914 or whether you get shot in eastern Ukraine. You're still getting shot and shot at. Yeah. So
I was in Sardinia in 1943.
Yeah, and guess what? When people shoot at you, it reminds me of there was a movie many years ago with Walter Matthau, and he was on the phone yelling at this operator saying something, "You can't do that to me. I'm a veteran. I fought in the big one. Korea. Well, it was the big one to me." Which is perfectly true. But all of this stuff that we're giving to the Ukrainians, at some point we have to consider, how does that affect our security? How does that affect our stockpiles?
Well, especially since we've been retarding our ability to create those stockpiles, much less I don't even want to go into the whole thing about the F-35, but we have really tried to streamline these things and reduce what we actually create, on top of trying to stay 5th gen, 6th gen, but we're not getting ahead. We have fewer commissioned and capable aircraft carriers now than we did 10 years ago. We have fewer subs. We have fewer everything.
Well, the entire fleet is smaller.
Yeah.
So is the United States Army. So is the Marine Corps. So is the Air Force.
Right. And that's understandable to a point. What we don't have is the capability to ramp up, especially as these things get ever more technical.
Yeah, well, that's not true. We have the capability to ramp up. However, just as it did in World War II, that ramping up process is going to take with full national commitment, it would take at least a year just to get industry prepared to produce these items.
I don't know that we have industry that could do it and also support the rest of the nation. I mean, yes, there would be a lot less, phones, TVs, cars, uh, you know, just the electronics involved would retard the ability to produce those consumer goods. And even then, I don't know that we could really stay ahead of the curve in order to produce these military assets, both materiel and actual equipment.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. There's a lot of stuff we wouldn't be able to produce. On the other hand, we'd probably be able to produce a shitload of P-47 Thunderbolts.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's true.
We have a lot of depth to fall back on.
Well, and that's why you got to keep going, to the fifth gen, sixth gen, seven. I mean, that's exactly the reason. Without staying ahead of that, intelligence curve, you don't have redundancy. All you have is, whatever you got on hand.
Come as you are, war.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't have it at the beginning, you're not going to have it during the war. And
No.
And we're not even belligerents here. Although based on our military expenditure, we might as well be. We're not even belligerents here, and we're stripping our own stockpiles. And by the way, I don't have an answer. I mean, the answer doesn't, to me, seem to be, well, fuck it, let Putin have what he wants. Because that's just
that's what's so frustrating about this whole thing is we can't let Putin win. But why is it we're spending so much to support Ukraine, and why isn't Europe spending more? And there are some obvious reasons.
Oh yeah, we know why Europe isn't spending more. They don't have the defense budget to do it, and they are not going to make any social welfare cuts.
Exactly.
They're very big on talking about how important it is to support Ukraine. What they're not big on is making any significant sacrifice that would be required to do so.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I mean,
meanwhile, we're spending ourselves into oblivion.
Honestly, in some senses, it'd be better off if Russia did invade Poland, because at least then the Europeans would have to take notice.
It's like kind of in baseball, giving up the steal of second, or giving up the walk just to get the force out. There is something to be said about that. Depleting, Russia's blood and treasure to the point where they're so weakened that, okay, now you got Ukraine. What are you going to do now?
Of course, the problem is we can't really become belligerents. I mean, we could stop the Russians tomorrow if we wanted to.
If we were to declare direct war on them, yeah, then of course the nuclear thing comes in.
Yeah, but then of course, then Vladimir Putin starts turning the keys. And, because they will start launching. I don't even
think he'd fire them at us. I think he'd fire them at Europe and Israel.
Sure. And he'd certainly fire them at Ukraine. And would we trade Seattle, Los Angeles, Oklahoma City, Chicago for Kiev or Kharkiv?
No. That's a close question there, Bill.
I mean, we'd send a very strongly worded note if, he nuked Kiev, or hell, if he nuked Warsaw. We might, have a very frank exchange of views, as they say in diplomatic speak. But would somebody in Minot, North Dakota be turning a Minuteman III missile key? I doubt it.
Yeah. Well, now the Chinese know where everything is anyway, it would probably be moot.
Oh, Christ, we've had those missile silos sitting out there in North Dakota for 60 years. Everybody knows where they are.
I still can't believe that they let that happen. It's just beyond me.
Oh yeah, we've spent 10 minutes talking about the future of the podcast, 50 minutes talking about the Ukraine war, which I didn't even want to talk about, by the way. We just sort of slid into this
Yeah.
just pretty much as the entire world has slid into this fucking quagmire where there are many reasons to get involved and many reasons not to get involved and many reasons to want to stop Russia and other reasons to say, screw it, this is not worth our effort. I think the American government would do the American people a much better service if they just said, look, we're just trying to muddle through this. This is all real confusing. No one is the pro from Dover when it comes to this. There are a lot of conflicting stuff here. The Ukrainians, yeah, some of them are good. Some of them are Nazis. The Russians, yeah, they're bad. But do we want them to freaking launch a nuclear strike on the United States? No, we don't. We don't have a lot of good options here. And as long as Vladimir Putin wants to keep attacking on the ground and throwing Russian men at this problem into a meat grinder, which is, by the way, how the Russians have fought every single war ever, this thing is just going to drag out. We're not entirely sure what to do. We don't want Putin to win. We don't want NATO to fall apart. We don't want Poland to come under threat. There's not a lot of good options here, folks. We're just trying to muddle through this. Rather than at least, try to tell people, yeah, these brave freedom fighters of Ukraine who are fighting for freedom. No, they're not. They're fighting not to be Russians. And by the way, it's mainly the people in the central and eastern part of the country that are fighting not to be Russians. Because you know what? There's a lot of people in Western Ukraine that are fighting pretty hard to be fucking Russians.
And in Eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, there's at least a large minority or a plurality who would like to be Russians too.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it's a great big fucked up world when it comes to that whole thing. Meanwhile, China floats a balloon across the entire fucking U.S. We do nothing about it, and then pretend like we did something. And next thing we know, we're shooting balloons out of the sky.
We're shooting hobby balloons out of the sky.
I love that. Goodyear blimp. Actually, I don't know if it was true. It was. Matter of fact, it probably wasn't real. It was probably Photoshop, but it was just funny to see a Goodyear blimp, that has, flies over football games and other games and whatever, and have up on its screen, don't shoot.
Yeah, well, I mean, the week after the Chinese thing, which I think the administration felt enough pressure for just letting that balloon go all the way across the country and doing nothing, and it seemed like they were just fumbling their way through it, that by the next week, some poor little kid in Portland at some street fair loses his little helium balloon, and we have to call NORAD out on the damn thing.
I mean, it's so absurd, it's comical. I mean, it really is. It's just like, oh, but look how we're on it now. We are taking down balloons everywhere. And how much do you feel if you're shooting a sidewinder at these little hoppy balloons? How much shit are you getting back in the hangar when you come back in?
And by the way, every time you yell Fox 1 over that microphone, you're getting rid of $250,000.
That's exactly right. Actually, I think it's more than that. I think it's almost $500,000.
No, I think it depends on which one it is, but I think the Sidewinder runs between $250 and $275 per missile.
And that's about 100,000 times more than what they're shooting down.
Yeah, I again, a P-47 with Browning 50s could take down these balloons. Not sure. I mean, of course, we really don't put guns on aircraft with any serious alacrity anymore the way we used to. So, it's probably just as expensive to pop off that 30 millimeter chain gun for 5 seconds,
yeah, right,
as it is to drop an AIM-9 on them.
Well, that brass goes somewhere. We got to look out for the environment.
Yeah, one of our listeners says, "I'd have them paint a balloon on my plane. It's a kill, man." Which, by the way, in today's Air Force would not surprise me. There's probably some pilot there that goes, "Let's go on 4 more balloons, and I'm an ace." I get an air medal for that shit.
I'm sure there are some sarcastic balloons going up on some planes.
Oh, if I was the crew chief for that, I guess it shut it down with it was an F-22 that shut it down, or was it an F-35?
I don't know. No, it wasn't an F-35.
But I think it was an F-22. Which, okay, fine. If I was the crew chief for that aircraft, I would have a balloon stencil made the next day. It would just be, Captain Smith J, and one
your name's on that plane.
And one freaking red balloon with a yellow star on the middle of
it. A little picture of Nina.
Oh yeah, if I was a crew chief for that plane, I would. Oh, that would be even better. One silhouette of Nina, and that aircraft pilot would just go batshit crazy on you as soon as he saw it. Hey, sir, it's a kill. Get that shit off of there.
She tried to warn us.
Yeah. There's 98 more coming, by the way.
But, oh my God, what a farce. What an absolute farce. But like you started off the podcast with, it's like the incompetence is just so staggeringly large that it's like, what parts do you pick out from the other parts? What's really actually more important than the other things?
Well, it's like Pete Buttigieg showing up 2 weeks after that crash.
No, 2 weeks.
Or 3 weeks. Actually, 3 weeks.
And the day after Trump already went.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a day late and a dollar short.
Oh my God.
And he's the Secretary of Transportation. And of course, last week he said, look, there's like 1,000 train derailments a year. Which, by the way, is a significant understatement because it's closer to 2,000. Since 2010, it's been at least 1,700 a year, 1,800 a year, steady. And by the way, that's an improvement.
Yeah.
Because in the early 2000s, there were like 3,000 of these things a year, 10 a day.
Which is weird because we never, ever heard about that.
Look, even now, there are between 4 and 5 train derailments a day. It is literally the definition of dog bites man story.
Yeah, no, it's funny because my son, who's in high school, he's a junior, it was brought up in his math class about how, there's actually like 4 a day, every day. And that's normal.
Sure, and most of the time it's because it hit some idiot who stalled their car on the train tracks,
right?
And the train hits the car and derails. And
most of the time, it also includes transit rail, which is a whole nother.
No, it doesn't. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics figures only count freight accidents in that data set. So
they don't count any Amtrak.
Well. Yes, Amtrak would count as well. Like light rail, city transportation, stuff.
Not that. Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah, so yes, it does count Amtrak because Amtrak is part of the national rail network. So that's just the federal rail that the federal government regulates. Right. Which, of course, is largely freight because who rides Amtrak anymore, for cripe's sake?
Around here, that's how my son gets back and forth from school.
Oh yeah, well, out here, nobody rides Amtrak.
The what do they call it? The Acela corridor.
Yeah, the Acela corridor. Yeah. No, I get that, but outside of that, the rest of the country is all just sending rail. And by the way,
so you're not taking that train up to San Quentin.
No,
Oh, that's right. It's not running yet.
no, it's not running yet. And by the way, it'll be Bakersfield to Fresno, which again will be yet another rail system out west that literally no one rides. But it is going to cost, $90 billion.
Yeah, at least.
And that's just the Bakersfield to Fresno piece. Let's not even talk about how you get into San Francisco and Los Angeles.
That's supposed to be the bare bones part of it.
Yeah, that's the flyover part of California where no one lives. Yeah, it's easy to build that part of the railroad.
Oh, wow. But it was supposed to be.
But I have to wonder because, in Europe, where, I lived, again, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, everybody takes rail. That's basically how you get around in Europe. Yeah. Everybody is on rail. It's massive. I can't believe that even in the entire continent of Europe, they got 4 to 5 derailments a day. You would hear about it, I would think. And by the way, you'd think you'd hear about it.
That's a good question, actually. I wonder what it is.
Yeah, because that's basically.
Oh, it's a massive rail system.
Basically, here in America, it's 5 rail accidents a day, 5 train derailments a day. I think we're lucky that considering the amount of petroleum distillates and other dangerous chemicals that are shipped almost exclusively by rail, I think we're probably lucky that we don't get more of these East Palestine, Ohio accidents.
I absolutely agree with you on that. And that's one of the reasons, and it's never won with the EPA, but it was one of the reasons cited several times when the claims came before the Bureau about why they're shutting down these pipelines or the building of pipelines or the continuation of pipeline, all that stuff.
Yeah, if you can't ship this stuff by pipe, it's got to go by rail.
Yeah, and that it's a lot more dangerous, which it is. It's also a lot more expensive. It's just so much safer to ship it or to transport it via these pipelines. And then the other thing about it, this is the thing that really sort of bothers me is, and I can't remember, did I bring this up last week about how?
Oh, by the way, hate to interrupt, but again, our commenters are freaking on it. In 2021, according to one of our commenters, and he says that he's not clear on whether these are all derailments, but in 2021, there were 1,389 significant railway accidents in the European Union, with a total of 683 persons killed and 513 seriously wounded. So basically, 1,000 more people died or 600 more people died in train accidents in Europe than died in the United States in 2021, because we basically run about 100 deaths a year.
Yeah, but I wonder what that is compared to, number of miles traveled.
Yeah, the passenger miles in Europe must be insane compared to America.
I would think they would eclipse us by almost tenfold. But that's good information to have. Thank you, listener.
Google is our friend, apparently.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Let's not go too far.
We may find out whether or not Google is our friend.
But one of the thing I was wondering, just specifically with the East Palestine thing, was why isn't there some, way to neutralize chemicals? Now, granted, my level of chemistry ended in college, and I haven't exactly studied it since then. But I seem to remember that you can neutralize chemicals fairly easily. Not fairly easily. That's not what I mean. But with specific other chemicals. In other words, that toxic chemicals, when reduced to a volatile form, can be made completely involatile, or at least less volatile, with interaction with another element.
Okay, that is true. That is true. And granted, on my degree program, programs actually, I did not have to take chemistry in college. And indeed, my science elective was biology. So I haven't taken chemistry since high school. So I didn't take chemistry in either college or in graduate school. But yes, technically, any chemical can be counteracted by another chemical, whether you want to spread that second chemical around and put it into the groundwater is
absolutely no. That's exactly right.
Is a problem. But, and by the way, we're talking about as God, our listeners, Jesus Christ. We're talking about 90,000 gallons of counteragent that we would need, and how would we get it there in a timely fashion? So, yeah, logistically. No.
What I mean is, why isn't it part and parcel of the transport? Now, there may be a very good reason. It's a cost-benefit analysis, and it's too expensive. It's
because half of your freight has to be a chemical that no one wants and will never use unless there's an accident. And so you're losing half of your freight capacity. So that's never going to happen.
Well, and if that's the reason, okay, I can understand that. But it seems to me there's got to be some way. And really what I'm aiming at here is the burn off that caused that giant cloud. And who knows what repercussions that's going to have? Because
vinyl chloride, some pretty nasty stuff.
It didn't stay over top of East Palestine. It had to move out over Pennsylvania and probably even into Canada.
Yeah, probably with unknown effects on a very wide swath of the environment in those areas.
Yeah,
groundwater and whatnot.
Why? It just seems to me that like there should be, and maybe you know what? I'm acting like I'm the first one to think of this. I have to assume that somebody thought of this.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I think people who make their livings shipping dangerous chemicals have probably at least discussed over the water cooler.
I would hope so.
And they probably come to the same conclusion. How would we do it? If you have 90,000 gallons of X, then you're going to need another 90,000 gallons or more of Y to neutralize it.
Right.
Now we're at 180,000 gallons of shit on a train. That's just never going to happen. So I guess
one of those things where it's like my trust in anything government or science right now is so low that I have to question it.
Well, one of the interesting things I saw this last week was, all these people who are going up and seeing Donald Trump, and they're so grateful for him to be there. He's the reason why they're suffering this in the first place, because he's the one who killed the regulations that would have put the PEH brakes on those trains.
ECP.
Yeah, ECP. Whatever. The train didn't have them. And you know why it didn't have them? Because the Obama administration in 2015 killed them via, I forget what law it was, but there's some fast track law that was signed. And so therefore, the Obama administration said, we're going to hold off on putting those brakes on the train. And then in 2018, the Transportation Department said, basically, we're just not going to do that. So this is an Obama
cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, this is an Obama.
They came to the conclusion.
Yeah, but it was an Obama era policy that finally came out in 2018 that said, we can't really do it. So, again, we have to politicize everything.
Yes.
And this shouldn't be political. By the way, I think our train infrastructure probably sucks. And I think we probably don't spend enough. I saw a picture of train tracks near East Palestine. Take it with a grain of salt, because it was a long shot with a telephoto lens. And there was probably some significant ground distortion. But you expect train tracks to be straight, right? And in this particular perspective, these train tracks look like they were drawn by a 3-year-old. I mean, they were just wandering back and forth and up and down and saying, see how horrible our train tracks are? Now, again, with telephoto, you can make something that's fairly straight look really awful. But I suspect our rail infrastructure is not top flight.
I would agree. And I don't think there's been a lot of push from the federal government again to move away from that, even though some of these towns, especially in flyover country, depend on those crossovers. East Palestine being one of them. I mean, they have trains coming through there all the time, and it's because it's an actual stopover point, especially for shipping. Especially for shipping.
And by the way, is it East Palestine or East Palestine?
They pronounce it Palestine.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've heard.
It's always Americans with their stupid pronunciations for common words.
Well, it's so. As an aside, my daughter has a theory that the reason that the Brits pronounce, words they've literally stolen from the French, like herbs, they pronounce herbs.
Yeah.
And it's not fillet, it's fillet, is because they hate the French so much.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't surprise me. They still do.
It is kind of funny when you think about it.
Yeah. Well,
and Americans are just like, I don't know how to pronounce this. This is how I'm pronouncing it.
Yeah, there was another example that I wanted to bring up of just complete mispronunciation, but I can't think of it now. But it's like this common word that everybody knows, and then this town is pronounced. No, it wasn't Canada, but this town is pronounced completely different.
Oh, Eve.
Yeah. All right. Well,
it was
the Department of Transportation is run by an incompetent. And by the way, it looks like everybody in the Biden administration is run by incompetence, but at least as Catherine Jean-Pierre, speaking of correct pronunciation, Catherine Jean-Pierre said this week, for the first time in American history, the cabinet has a majority of people of color, of women, of go down all of the
it's the most diverse cabinet
DEI
ever.
Categories. But it's not the most diverse in competence. And it was hilarious.
Well, it depends on how you define competence.
It was hilarious.
There's a lot more incompetence.
This week that Sam Brinton, the guy who used to be the nuclear waste expert for the Department of Energy, but who got fired because of his felony charge for stealing luggage at airports. This week, a Tanzanian fashion designer who is currently living in Houston, Texas, came out and said, hey, in 2018, my shit got jacked at an airport. And lo and behold, there's pictures of this Sam Brinton guy wearing my shit. And so she had pictures of her in this dress that she had designed right next to a picture of Sam Brinton wearing the exact same dress. And he only could have got it from one place.
I mean, literally the exact same dress.
Yes.
And in fact, he was photographed on Vanity Fair in one of them.
But hey, he was diverse. He was a DEI.
Yeah, the strange thing too is he was actually one of the most qualified. He at least was a nuclear physicist. I mean, he did have the credentials, and apparently was fairly good at it. He's just a complete weirdo.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, it caught everyone by complete surprise because how could you have possibly known?
Right. I mean, frankly, he was a better pick in a lot of ways than Cringe Pierre and well, obviously Kamala Harris. Um, I mean, these people were completely incompetent. They had no Pete Buttigieg. Are you kidding me? The
Look,
guy
the
was
guy
a
is
horrible mayor.
the guy was the mayor, and not a particularly successful one, by the way. But he was the mayor of a middling sized town in the Midwest.
Yeah,
That's literally the only qualification he has professionally.
it was South Bend, right, where
Yeah, yeah,
Notre Dame is,
yeah. He has no
and they
experience
called him
in.
Pothole Pete.
Yeah,
He wasn't even successful there.
yeah. So his experience with transportation, of all things, I mean, say what you want about Elaine Chao, or as Donald Trump calls her, Coco Chow Chow, because he's such an asshole.
But he is a funny
I mean,
asshole.
she was qualified to be the Secretary of Transportation.
Yeah. Well, her father does run the biggest shipping company between Asia and America.
She practically grew up in the business.
That reminds me of that bit by what's her name, Kathleen Madigan, about how she was so excited when Hillary was going to run. Her dad was like, "How the hell is she qualified? I mean, what's she ever done?" And she was like, "Well, but she lived in the White House for all of these years." Oh, okay, I get it. Well, tell you what, next time the plumber's sick, just ask his wife to come over, and she'll fix it because I mean, that's almost the level of thinking, except that's actually more thinking than what this White House has done.
Well, it goes back to something we talked about last week. All of these people in all of these positions, I mean, Americans still have this idea that people in government, people who are running these departments or whatever, that they're qualified. I mean, they're picked, and the Senate confirms them, certainly at the cabinet and immediate sub-cabinet levels. So, I mean, they're all vetted, so they should be the pros from Dover. They know what they're doing. No, what they know how to do is get a government job. Yep. And get an appointment and hold that appointment. And they make the appropriate mouth noises at the appropriate time, or 3 weeks past the appropriate time, as the case may be. And they're never going to lose their jobs. I mean,
nope.
They've got their appointment. They're part of the administration, and they're going to be there for as long as they want to be there. And
I mean, let's look at Joe Biden. This guy has only failed up. He has never successfully accomplished anything. And the only thing he's ever done is in government. And he's been in the government for over 50 years. And he's never accomplished anything. Not one thing. And they made him president.
Yeah, that's how government works. It kind of reminds me of Ghostbusters, where Dan Aykroyd, when they're about to be fired from the university, he says, "I've worked in the private sector. They expect results." Yeah, well, if that was true in 1982, how much more, or 84, how much more true is that today? Yeah, the private sector expects results. What results do we expect from the government? Whatever they are, I can almost guarantee that we're not getting them.
But no, we get multipliers. Don't you understand? We get multipliers from government spending. This is always, I remember when Paul, the economist, the idiot economist, New York Times, Krugman was pushing this idea that for every dollar the federal government spends, we get $1.4 of efficiency out of it. Like, what? How is that even, where do you even come up with that number? It's just so obviously false.
And here's the problem with that argument. And by the way, it's an argument that I must assume that Paul Krugman knows perfectly well. That we
is wrong. Yeah.
That, the only way that is falsifiable is if we stop taxing and see what happens when that money remains in the private sector and check out what that multiplier might be. So, we can make up any term. Yeah, government, what is it, Baghdad Bob? The multiplier is infinite. Yeah, maybe it is for all we know, because we don't have a counterfactual that we can point to.
Well, except that we do. I mean, we have lots of counterfactuals. When the government gets involved and takes over any space of economic influence, everything gets more expensive. Everything. Medicine. Look at medicine. Medicine has got increasingly, almost exponentially, not quite, but pretty damn close, more expensive ever since we instituted Medicare and Medicaid. And that's taking over, at the time, I think it was only about a quarter. But now it's almost like 2/3 of all medical spending. And and then we wonder why it's gotten more expensive. Education. As soon as the government got involved in how college was paid for and who paid for it and what went to pay for it, as soon as federal tax dollars went in there, it got more expensive. There's no federal multiplier there. There's actually a detractor.
Yeah. And by the way, there are times when the private sector is not a lot better.
That's true. Absolutely.
I think a lot of it has to do with the size of the organization. Just for an example, because, I saw an interesting video about this very subject by Adam Conover, the guy who used to do Adam Explains Everything on TV.
Yeah.
But Ticketmaster. All right, if you want to buy a ticket to any concert, basically anywhere in the country, you're going to buy it through Ticketmaster.
Yep.
Because they control basically 95% of all, certainly of online ticket sales, and something like 80% of all venue sales. So can we say that having a private market in concert tickets is working out great for everybody? Well, no, somehow we've managed to get a monopoly there. And by the way, the same thing has happened in banking. I remember growing up when there used to be, First National Bank and First State Bank and, all these banks everywhere. Any given town probably had 4 or 5 different banks. Same thing in radio. If you had 25 radio stations in your major metropolitan area, they were probably owned by 25 different people. And so, okay, great. But now if you work in radio, you either work for Infinity or Spectrum.
Or Clear Channel.
Or Clear Channel. And by the way, if you lose your job at Clear Channel, you're done in that town because they probably own all of the radio stations in that town. Here in San Diego, I think there is a Christian station that is still independently owned, but Infinity Broadcasting owns every single other station here. Maybe it's Spectrum. One of the two owns every radio station here in town. This is San Diego. There's like 25 radio stations here. They're all owned by the same company. And if you burn your bridges with that company, it's not, tritty trotting 6 blocks down the street to the next radio studio. You're just done. You now have to leave the city. You're being run out of town if you want to stay in
You're
radio.
banned.
And I'm a big fan of the free market, but one of the things that makes the free market work is competition. And somehow we're managing to basically monopolize banking and broadcasting and ticket sales. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff Oh
Well,
no,
those first two though
no,
are
listener, not the NPR station. That's owned by the University of
that's
San Diego.
owned by, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
but
but the first two are definitely governed by. I mean, they're regulated by um,
yeah,
the federal government.
regulated in quotes.
Yeah, I mean, ticket sales. Well, I'm sure it is regulated on some sense. I don't know how, or you know, I literally have no idea
Yeah, and
how
by the
it
way,
works. But
Amazon just bought a healthcare company.
oh, it did. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so okay, and then went straight by the FTC.
Well, but look,
Nobody better than I.
we should all want to have our phones, our healthcare, our refrigerators, our toasters, our TVs, um, our recliners, our headphones. Everything should be on the same service and all in complete sync with one another in happy harmony. And then we don't have to worry about anything. We can let somebody else take care of
Yeah,
it.
well, that's how the EU does it.
Yeah,
Like cell phones, they just mandate what the technology will be, and your cell phone has to work in every single EU country.
right.
Yeah, that's what they even did that to Apple with the USB-C connector. Nope, no Lightning in Europe. Everything has to be USB-C, or you just can't sell it here.
Yeah.
Okay, and by the way, USB-C is like 1,000 times better than Lightning, but still, that should be Apple's choice. But that choice should
Although
be.
Apple does fuck with us. I mean,
Yeah, they do like to lock you into their ecosystem.
and planned obsolescence and all that shit.
Yeah, but
But anyway, that's a whole.
yeah,
We could go on for literally
yeah,
like
because
2.5 hours more on
we
that.
are centralizing power, and by the way, part of this is technology that enables it. The
Yes.
technology that we were so giddy about in the first 10 minutes of this program is the same technology that enables a single company to say we can build a monopoly over the entire nation. It couldn't be done 30, 40, 50 years ago. We should be a lot more worried, not just about monopolies that are created by the government, because those are always by definition a worry. Because once a government supports a monopoly, it's with us for life, whether it's via regulation or what have you. We should also be worried, and this is what really kills me as a free marketer. What the free market appears to be moving towards is monopolization of practically every industry that can leverage technology to build a monopoly. And I
Yeah.
have no idea how to stop it.
Well, that's the thing is that it's a first mover problem, right? I mean, um, Twitter is the shit because everybody signed up for it and there was no alternative until much later. And even the alternatives are just not as good as Twitter. Facebook is the same way, and they have moved towards this social monopoly. They don't have a monopoly economically on us. Well, they do, not that we know it, because we're only paying with our
Privacy.
personal info and data. um, we don't have, because we don't pay for it. We don't realize the actual cost. So it's a very unique problem, that you got to hand it to the monopolizers, that they have found a very unique way to get lots and lots and lots of attention, and monetize it. And
Yeah,
that's
although Facebook seems to be pretty keen on frittering all that away.
they are, well, they're innovators, and they don't recognize when they had a good thing, and could have left it alone. This whole meta nonsense, but whatever. I mean, they're still ripping people off, have been ripping people off. Twitter the same way. Uh, Google, especially. Google is incredibly worrisome just because of how it controls what people actually learn.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
the ability of Google, and because Google now owns YouTube and several uh, other outlets, what you want to see and what Google will allow you to see are not the same things.
yeah, that's right.
And Google has this ability, and they do it. One of the things that we talked about at the first part of the podcast is, could we survive on Google with some of the stuff that we say? And I think, a lot of stuff we say would probably get by, but there's some things that we say that if it caught Google's attention could get us not just demonetized, but banned off of the platform. And at the very least,
I can think of a few podcasts that would get that.
And at the very least, would get us so pushed down in the algorithm that nobody would ever see
right,
it.
that we never show up.
Yeah, we just never show up. And
the statistics show that it, beyond page 2, of Google, I mean, you're not getting looked at.
No, you're not. And the same thing applies with YouTube. They have things that they want you to see. And I think there is some level of political censorship that goes into this on YouTube. But I think for the day-to-day YouTube user, they are far more interested in pushing content to you that gets CPMs, clicks.
Sure.
And Google has morphed from find anything that you want really quickly because our search algorithm is that good to find anything that we think you will click on to produce money because our search engine is that good.
Yeah.
And again, it's pretty much a monopoly. I mean, Bing exists. Not that you would know, but it does. But who uses it?
Actually,
because it sucks.
Well, I have to use Bing actually anybody who does any search on a federal who is a federal government contractor and is doing a search on a computer that is within that realm it has to use something other than Google. You actually cannot be compliant and use Google, which is really interesting that the federal government does not trust Google to be used as a search engine. But it does trust Bing, which a lot of people don't know, actually uses Google algorithms.
Yes, just not as effectively because I can never find any shit that I want on Bing. Although increasingly it's getting harder to find it on Google as well. And because I do spend...
Let's go back to Alta Vista. There's a blast from the past. How many people remember that?
I used to like Alta Vista.
I loved Alta Vista.
And back when the internet was, 100,000
like
pages. Yeah, well, a lot of things I used to like. But, one of the arguments that libertarians have always made, and by the way, we're kind of getting close to Section 230 stuff, which I didn't intend to cross, but if we have to cross that bridge, we'll cross it. One of the things that libertarians have always argued, and conservatives as well, which is, you got to keep hands off of all this stuff because the government will just screw it up, which, okay, yeah, sure, it will. You're expounding a religious doctrine to the temple singers there. But that doesn't mean that the private companies won't screw it up as well. If there's a way to do it,
and just
they'll do it.
For this out there, that the defense that the private companies will screw it up as well was always there. It was just that, that's going to invite competition in.
Yeah, but now the problem is, how do you compete? Okay, let's take YouTube. Now, Rumble exists. I mean, it's there. It's alive. People use it. It's not a tiny, tiny community the way it used to be, but it also ain't YouTube. I mean,
No, you're not going to find it on your hotel room TV that you can just go and sign into your account and look up whatever you want.
yeah, and the sheer amount of barrier to entry for, let's say, making a YouTube competitor, the number of servers that you would need to have, the amount of disk space that you would need to have, all the performance monitoring and stuff, so the bandwidth requirements, just the capital expenditure for trying to compete with YouTube. Well, I mean, who has that money? I mean, maybe Facebook did at one point, but right now, if somebody decided to make a real competitor to YouTube, who could do it?
Yeah, I mean, not even Elon Musk at this point could do it.
No, and let's say that the FTC did get involved, and the FTC decided, okay, we are going to bring an antitrust action against, I guess it would have to be Alphabet, right?
Right.
That would be the parent company. So we're going to bring an antitrust action against Alphabet, and we're going to split Google up into three different companies.
Mini Googles.
Let's say, three different companies.
There'll be Atlantic Google. There'll be L Google. Yeah.
Okay, even if you did that, okay, how would you split up the billions of hours of content?
And how would you do that anyway? Because the whole point is that the internet is everywhere. It's like you can't actually do that. It's not like users only come from one particular area. When they split up into the baby bells, it turned into regional bells, which didn't help anything.
Yeah, because regional monopolies are much better than a national monopoly.
Right. But that's beside the point. There's no way to actually split it up. I mean, that's not a solution because the internet is everywhere.
Yeah, but the content isn't everywhere. I mean, the content lives on Google servers. So, to that extent, then the question becomes, okay, what do you do? Just every, eeny, meeny, miny, mo as to which new Google gets this video.
Right.
Okay, and then how do we transfer that?
Virtual access.
Yeah.
What has regional access?
Yeah, it's just, how would you split it up? Because there's billions of hours of video files that would have to be, would you shut them off on, or would all three Googles have to have all the same videos on them at the beginning? Well, now you've just tripled the amount of storage infrastructure and bandwidth infrastructure you need for all three companies. I just don't know.
See, that's why
I don't know how you do it.
Is just to turn them into, or legislate them as a public utility, but a federal public, see, even that's not going to work.
Well, okay, now we get the feds involved. That's going to work out
right.
Great.
Yeah. See, that's not going to work either. At least if the feds are involved, well, no, that's not even going to change anything. And I'm obviously thinking off the top of my head here.
Yeah, no, it's a hard nut. It's a hard nut. Listener says, "Don't go there, Michael." Look, it's a hard nut to crack. I don't know how you would split it apart. I mean, look, when you split up Standard Oil, at least you knew where they,
which didn't even matter at the time.
Yeah, but at least you knew where all their assets were geographically. Right, so you could
then
make
you got Esso and you got Exxon and you got Arco
and whenever you split up the phone companies, well, they did it on a regional basis, and they split up Ma Bell into 8 different regional bells. Okay, fine, it works because all their infrastructure was largely confined inside those regions, and it was logical. But then when you get into, how would you do it with banking? How would you split up Wells Fargo?
Yeah, that's what Glass-Steagall was supposed to do, right? Was to split the investment banking side.
Yeah, but forget the investment banking side. We could just reimpose Glass-Steagall and just force force all the banks to divest themselves of their investment arms and spin them off as separate companies. That would be easy. What if we decide we don't want a nationwide bank like Wells Fargo that controls that many deposits? What if we wanted to split up Wells Fargo? How would we do it? I mean, by state? Well, that's how it got started in the first place.
Yeah. Well, that's how we do insurance
bank.
companies.
Yeah. And so I guess, but, we do have people that move around in the country. So what would that mean if I moved out of, California? Wells Fargo in New Mexico would not be Wells Fargo in California, and I would have to shut down my account. I'd have to transfer everything over. I'll have to order new checks. My account numbers would all change. It would throw off all of my bill pay.
Yes.
Yeah. We have all of this convenience, like in banking. So I could get a wild hair and just move to Texas tomorrow. I could just abandon everything and go live out, outside of Killeen, Texas in a shelter.
Do it.
And my bank would still be Wells Fargo, and I'd still have the same account number, and I wouldn't have to get new checks or do anything else. I'd be fine. There's a level of convenience that comes with that type of market control. But
and that's how it's sold, quite frankly.
Yeah. And it used to be if you move to a different state, well, you're going to have to take all your money out of the bank or wire it from your old bank to your new bank, and you're going to have to start all over from scratch. So, we've given up a lot of competition, which means given up a lot of restraint over both prices and restraint over commercial practices in favor of this convenience. And I honestly don't know how we dial that back.
Well, I don't think we can, because the only people who would want to dial it back are people who are thinking long term. And that's very, very, very few people. And there's no real solution. So unless somebody comes up with, and I'm really kind of hoping you and I can come up with it, because we're going to be fucking rich if we do.
Yeah, it's true.
There isn't really a solution. That convenience factor is huge. I mean, really paramount. It's really nice to know that, just like, if you go to an Applebee's anywhere in the entire country, it's going to have the same food.
Riblets.
It's going to be served the same way. You're going to have the same things, and it's comfort. Well, it's nice to know that about your banking system. It's nice to know that your phone is going to work. It's nice to know that you can reach out to anybody you need to wherever you are. I mean, that's a lot of convenience and a lot of, hitting you in that safety portion of your gizzard.
You know what it comes back to? It's the fact that we're too rich and we're too comfortable and we're too well off that we can't live with inconvenience anymore. I mean, look,
there's something to be said about that. That's actually a really good point.
Whenever you,
it can be taken too far. I think.
Yeah. Whenever you thought your wife could die in childbirth and one of your children wouldn't live to the age of 10, and you might come down with diphtheria and die any winter, having to order checks and get a new checking account at a different bank probably wasn't that big on your list of priorities.
No, nor was transporting, the whole $800 of cash that you had saved up in your entire life.
Yeah, but when everything in your life has, and that's the sort of the devil's deal that we've made with.
Oh, that's it.
Big
that's
business.
Exactly right.
Make me convenient and I'll give you all of my personal information. Make it possible for me to see funny cat videos And you can sell my
wherever I am.
Yeah, and you can sell my information to anybody. Oh, and by the way, if you throw in a chat app there so that I can talk to friends all across the country, you know what? Take my personal information. Market to me,
That's the
baby.
deal we've made. I mean, think about it. Like we've talked about this so many times, about how we carry around a personal location device.
Oh yeah, there's nothing funnier than looking at a libertarian tweet that says the government surveillance has just gotten too intense. I can't believe that we care so little about freedom. Sent from my iPhone.
Right. On Twitter.
Yeah. You're
cross-reference to Facebook.
You're absolutely right. We don't care about our privacy, and we don't care about surveillance. You have hit the nail on the head, sir.
Right. And you know what? I mean,
maybe we can dial back on the self-righteousness from 11, but in general, you're correct.
And I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of downsides that we're seeing, but there are a lot of pluses that I don't think we recognize. I stay more in touch with my parents, with people I haven't seen in forever because of these abilities to be in constant interaction.
Oh, yeah, sure, because they call every frickin' day, which I love, well, by the way. It's great.
I mean, you and I would not have been doing this for as long as we've been doing this if this was back in like the 70s or the 80s and we had to do this all over an actual phone and do the recording, with a cassette tape recorder, or if we're really fancy with a, a track, or not an H, or
a reel to reel,
reel to reel.
And by the way, if we were doing it on a reel to reel, we wouldn't be doing it for more than an hour.
Right. And the phone costs alone would have been astronomical.
And the sound would have been shitty. And it would have cost, $150,000 to be able to hook a phone to a reel to reel recorder.
I mean,
of course, any editing would have had to be done. And I know because I've had to do it with a razor blade and editing tape.
Yep. So, I mean, these conveniences have made a lot of things better. A lot of things.
But it's a devil's deal we've made to get it. That's all I'm saying.
It's true. And I think it's the Americanness in us, and I really do believe this, that says, well, you know what? We can find a way out of this and make it even better.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, nothing lasts forever. The Rand Corporation study we talked about last week says that Western civilization is going to collapse in 2040 and all these problems will be solved. We'll just have...
just replaced by
a different set of problems. Finding food or energy or anything like that.
Sickness.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. Like the first thing, I'm always wondering this. I know we've talked about this before, but I don't know if we've ever talked about it before on the podcast. But like the first thing I'm going to hit if society collapses, and I shouldn't even say this, except that I want our listeners to also do this, is I'm going to the pharmacy. I want as much antibiotic, as much just like base. I don't need anything to get me high. I just want actual life-saving shit.
Yeah, which for me would be diabetes medication. I'm not on insulin, but I'm going to need a shit ton of metformin.
Right.
And I'm not sure that's going to be enough.
I mean, that's like the first place I would go. And I know it's going to be ransacked for all the, the codeine and whatever else, but that is I'm not going to the grocery store.
Yeah, my neighbors probably have some food, so I've got plenty of food.
Either you come with me and bring your shit, or I'm just taking it.
Yeah, food isn't the problem.
No, I can find food. I can hunt food. I can fucking catch food. That's not my worry. My worry is antibiotics and other meds that like will just again, I don't need to be high. I just need to be able to function.
Yeah, because I can't imagine anything that would suck more than surviving the apocalypse and then dying from an infection because you tripped over your shoelaces and scraped a knee.
Are you fucking kidding me? I can't even meme this shit.
Well, look, we've been at this for almost 2 hours. We probably should think about shutting it down. Although I just got a package in the mail today. Speaking of the apocalypse coming, I just got 2 brand new sets of level 3A body armor.
Oh,
so I'm good against rifles at this point.
Nice. All right, meet you in Colorado.
All right, buddy. Have a great week, Michael. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Observations Podcast for the 24th, I believe, of February 2023. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We're glad that you do. Hope you're listening next time. Until then, have a great week. So long.